Greetings. Welcome to the Captive Desk. Please join me in welcoming a very special guest to the Captive Desk, Dan Phelps. Dan is a science educator, activist, documentary film star, and a justified thorn in Ken Ham's side. For those of you who may not know who Dan is directly, you probably already know who Dan is in a roundabout way. If you follow anything that has to do with Answers in Genesis, Ken Ham, and the Art Park attraction in Kentucky, as well as the Creation Museum and the pseudoscience they push on young and old alike. Dan releases the attendance numbers each month for the Art Park via public information requests. Dan was instrumental in getting information on what, if any, tax funding was involved in AIG's attractions. Dan is well known for his efforts in organizing Kentucky's scientific community to oppose teaching creationism and intelligent design creationism in public school science classes. He has written numerous letters to the editor and op-eds on this subject and appeared in We Believe in Dinosaurs, a documentary on what AIG is about and the pushback from scientists against the misinformation creationist organizations often promote as science. Dan graduated from the University of Kentucky with a BS in geology and later with an MS in geology. While in graduate school, he consulted for various oil companies. Upon graduation, he moved to Texas to work for the oil and gas and companies. And in 1994, he returned to Kentucky and worked as a coal geologist. Dan also worked for the Kentucky Environmental Protection Agency and was a part-time assistant to Dr. Nicholas Rast, the North American editor of the Journal of Geodynamics, and completed the peer review process for papers received before the unfortunate death of Dr. Rast. Dan also worked as a part-time professor at Lexington Community College, now Bluegrass Community and Technical College, to teach physical geology and dinosaurs and disasters. Dan is founder and current president of the Kentucky Paleontological Society, one of the most respected amateur paleontological organizations in the United States. In 2004, the Kentucky section of the American Institute of the Professional Geologists awarded Dan its Geologist of the Year award for his efforts in educating the public about geology and paleontology. In 2007, Dan was president of the Kentucky section of the American Institute of Professional Geologists and chairman of the geology section for the Kentucky Academy of Sciences. In 2008, the Kentucky Academy of Science awarded Dan the Distinguished Professional Scientist in a Non-Academic Position Award for his work with the Kentucky Paleontological Society and public education efforts. Also in 2007, Dan published an extensive review of the infamous Answers in Genesis Creation Museum on the National Center for Science Education website. And in 2017, the NCSE announced the winners of the Friend of Darwin Award for Edward J. Larson, the Pepperdine University historian and legal scholar who won a Pulitzer Prize for his 1997 book about the Scopes trial, Summer for the Gods; Richard E. Lenski, the Michigan State University evolutionary biologist, famed for his E. coli long-term experimental evolution project; and Daniel J. Phelps, a geologist and unrelenting critic of a young earth creationist ministry headquartered in his native Kentucky. The legal history of the creationism evolution controversy is important to NCSE, and nobody has studied it more thoroughly and insightfully than Ed Larson, commented NCSE's executive director, Ann Reed. Quote, while it would be hard to think of anybody who has done as much to show that evolution is among the experimental sciences as Richard Lenski, she added, as for Dan Phelps, he's the sort of activist who is a walking argument for human cloning. We could use a dozen of him. That is quite the compliment and in grand company, Dan. You can also find all the links to everything that I mentioned in the description below, as well as a few of the other things that are in Dan's bio. So check out the description, check out all the links. And Dan, welcome. Great to talk to you.
Well, thank you so much, Dave. It's a pleasure to be on here. I've watched many of your other videos and seen a few things with people I know about that are also involved in fighting Ken Ham. If you want to read a really nice review of me, Google "Who is Dan Phelps," and you'll find an article on Ken Ham's blog after a long tirade against me, which I found very complimentary in many ways. He asked everybody to pray for my soul that I will see the true light of creationism. So go to Ken Ham's blog and read all about me.
All right. I'll look it up later and I'll add it in. That sounds great. So before we get to all your activism and everything, let's back up a little bit. And when you were growing up, were you in a religious environment, a scientific environment? And did you ever hear about young earth creationism growing up or at church or anything?
It was really interesting. Here in central Kentucky, I grew up Roman Catholic in a environment that was about 90% Protestant fundamentalist, or at least Protestant evangelical. Um, so I avoided a lot of the indoctrination of young earth creationism. It turned out my mother was very religious Catholic, but my dad had been raised fundamentalist Baptist, and they got married in the late 1940s. I was born in 1962, and as a condition of them getting married in the Catholic Church, it was agreed that my mother would take care of my religious education. And the big secret that I didn't realize was that my father was actually an atheist. And that was the real reason that the arrangement was made. And I guess him growing up in a fundamentalist environment, he was really pissed at all the stupidity that he encountered as a youth. And anyway, the Catholicism didn't stick with me, obviously. But at least I didn't have the anti-science, anti-intellectual thing drilled into me to much of an extent. And my interest in science was encouraged by my parents, not so much encouraged by the local school system, which seems to cater to the jockocracy type thing of football and basketball players. But still, at least anytime I expressed an interest in science, I was supported and I was allowed to read almost anything I wanted to. But at the same time, my parents knew nothing of science. I remember getting a really nice telescope as a kid. Nobody could help me put it together and work it, and I had to wait a couple of years and take it all apart and put it back together and get it to work myself before I was able.
I had to do the same. I asked for it, but my parents couldn't help me. They got it for me.
Yeah, I got a nice little reflector.
I had to figure it out myself.
Nice little reflector. It was a cheapie, but they had no idea how the mirrors worked or anything, and I finally just had to take the whole dang thing apart and put it together myself. I got started collecting fossils because we had blue laws here in Kentucky. On Sundays, the local businesses were all shut down. My father was in the restaurant business, and there wasn't much business, so he would let the waitresses run it, and we'd go visit surrounding towns that had, some stores open besides just the drugstore and the grocery. And on the way, I would ask to stop and collect fossils. And I guess the blue laws are one of the things that led to me being a fossil collector to the extent I am.
It's weird how things work out sometimes.
Yeah. History is full of really weird events that are unexpected turns.
So what is your position right now? Are you religious? Are you an atheist?
No,
what is your position?
I refer to myself as an unbeliever. I don't like the word atheist. I guess that's one thing atheists always have a problem with is what they call themselves. And I consider myself an unbeliever. The word atheist implies that what I don't believe, and so does non-believer. But I'd rather be known for, promoting science, and I like to make arguments that even a evangelical Christian could agree with, because there's plenty of them on our sides. It seems like this controversy mainly draws in atheist and evangelical Christians. And we actually work pretty good together as long as we don't talk about certain things. And I try to keep my arguments based on the actual things I can show are wrong that don't necessarily have theological mix-ups, so, for lack of a better term. And I remember back in the 1980 trial over the Arkansas creationism law. I think it was 1981 was when they had the trial. One of the witnesses eventually blurted out that you don't expect me to be an expert on my own religion, do you? And I guess nobody truly is. But again, I like to refer to myself as a non-believer.
So it was just something that just kind of faded. And
Yeah, in fact, being raised Catholic, I always had great experiences with religion and church. Everybody treated me good. There was always good food, obviously after mass was over and stuff
I
like
tell
that.
everybody I have no ill will when I went to church.
I was never
Everybody was
butchered.
fine. I had no problems. You know, yeah.
I was never raped by a priest or
Nope.
beat on by a nun. My devoutly religious mother despised certain nuns even when she was in her 80s because as a child she had been beaten up in class and treated
Mm,
terribly by nuns. But anybody I've met like that has always been just an exemplary person.
yeah.
Local nuns are really wonderful, and with the exception, I can only think of one local priest that was a molester, and I never really encountered him as a kid. So my experience with the Catholic Church was pretty amicable.
Yeah, the only thing I ever heard was the old stranger danger, you know, things back in the day. Yeah, otherwise, yeah. You know, we ran the streets. I was in scouts, went to you know, Bibles classes all the way through confirmation, and yeah, everybody was great. And yeah, I didn't get hit with a yardstick or anything. So yeah, that's yeah. Now I understand a lot of people had bad experiences where I'm not trying to make light of it or anything, but
Yeah.
it's not a reason that, you know, I stopped going to church or anything. It wasn't the people or anything. You know?
So I guess basically I just feel that religion is sort of irrelevant as far as understanding the natural world or anything. It still asks the same questions anybody else asks, but it provides answers that I just don't basically find satisfying with regards to anything else.
So did you always had a bit of a fascination then ever since you were little with
Oh
science?
yeah, I had a horrible older brother who was 10 years older than me, but he had to do a book report when he was like 14 on dinosaurs,
Hmm.
and when he was basically copying out the encyclopedia, I started looking over his shoulder and I pretty much grabbed the book and ran with it. And I've loved dinosaurs and paleontology since I was literally a kindergartner,
Hmm.
and just grew up fossil collecting, amateur astronomy, amateur archaeology. I grew up in a subdivision across from the famous Calumet race horse farm
Hmm.
in Lexington, and the fields there had abundant Indian Native American artifacts, and all sorts of cool stuff. There were fossils to be found in the area, and I collected insects, moths. I raised caterpillars, monarch butterfly caterpillars until they were adults. Snakes, anything you can imagine, I'd be into like that. So I ended up with a good background in natural sciences. I originally thought I was going to be an entomologist or something when I was a little kid, but the dinosaurs and stuff like that and paleontology took hold.
And then you obviously went and got your degree and you did some teaching. And speaking of, there's Bree. I hope you just heard that when Dan was little, he was always collecting bugs and snakes and critters because I know Bree likes that too. And she used to do that too. So yeah, I hope you heard that, Bree. If not, back up just a minute. Dan was just saying it. And good to see you, Bree, and good to see you, Scott Duke. And so yeah, I was just going to ask you. I noticed that you coin collect too, don't you?
Oh yeah, yeah. I collect. In fact, for a while in high school, I actually had a business where I bought gold and silver and collected early U.S. coins and eventually ancient Greek and Roman coins, and managed to hold on to my collection all these years. Didn't sell it when I got desperate in grad school like I should have, but I'm glad I didn't. and I've started collecting coins again. That's something I'm interested
I
in.
see I see trees in the chat. Good to see you. Thanks for being here, everybody. And anything else? Any other interests outside of that? Do you go fishing or hiking or skiing or?
No, I've traveled a bit,
You've
but
stayed away from cliff faces recently, right?
oh no. Well, I've traveled a bit over the years. I've actually been to Antarctica after my parents were dead. I had enough inheritance. I went to Antarctica on an ecotourism trip, and then I did the same thing to Arctic Svalbard and went around Spitsbergen on a cruise too. So penguins and stuff like that in Antarctica and whales and
Neat.
leopard seals and all that neat stuff. I really wish I could scrape up the money again to do a longer trip. And but anyway, yeah, you were referencing my recent fall. Last November, I was helping lead a Kentucky Academy of Sciences geology trip, and I went off on the side of the road to find privacy to use the restroom. And the ground underneath me gave way, and I took a 30-foot fall off a cliff, and I'd have died if I hadn't have grabbed trees all the way down. And I cut up my hands and my knees, but also broke my sternum, 4 ribs, and one of my back vertebrae. And that was the first time I've been in the hospital since childhood.
Mm.
And then here a few weeks ago, well, about a month ago, I had a blister develop that got infected on my foot, and I'm sort of out of action again. But hopefully, once this is cured up, I'll be back on the field trips and doing stuff like that again.
Just give yourself a few more feet from the edge next time.
Yeah.
Quit trying.
One of the most dumbest, most humiliating things I've ever done.
Quit trying to whiz on cars. We know what you're up to.
Well, fortunately, I was all zipped back up again by the time I fell.
Well, fortunately, it wasn't too bad. I know you were pretty beat up, but you were, like you said, it could have been a lot worse. So yeah. We're glad you're still with us, and you'll be back at it soon. So let's check real quick. I wanted to say hi to everybody. I think I had said hi to Scott and Bree and Trees. Anybody else that's out there? Thanks for joining us. Let me scroll down here. I lost place, Dan. You were answering my questions before I could ask them. So, and you mentioned an older brother. Anybody else in the family a scientist or anything?
No. My dad dropped out of high school to fight in World War II with only 3 months of school left to go. When he turned the right age, he joined the Navy. My mother only went to undergraduate business school for a few semesters. I'm basically the first person to be in college in my family since the 1930s, when I had a great uncle that was an engineer. But my parents supported me, but they didn't understand a thing about what I wanted to do or anything like that.
Fair enough. All you can do is if you can support your kids, that's a great thing to do. So,
and that's one reason I've formed the Paleontology Club that I've formed, is that give people a chance to do a lot of stuff I didn't have anybody to help me out with when I was a kid. But mainly we have adults in the Paleo Club, but we actually go out on field trips every month and do some sort of talk every month. We'll have somebody come in, usually an expert on some particular fossil group. And we have enough people in the Cincinnati area and here in central Kentucky that we can usually have 11 talks a year. And we usually do about 10 or 11 field trips a year too. Once a year, then in January, we end up going to the Cincinnati Museum Center and looking at their collections.
Well, there you go. Anybody that's in the area that's interested, get a hold of Dan. The links are in the description. Yeah. Get a hold of him.
The Facebook page for the Kentucky Paleontological Society just passed 10,000 members.
That's great.
If only more than a couple hundred of them paid dues, we'd be able to bring in speakers worldwide. But that's a different matter. But most of the posts, of course, on there, people have found a concretion or something, and they think they found a dinosaur egg or something really bad. But the other day, some woman actually posted a a trackway from an early amphibian that was found in eastern Kentucky in Carboniferous age rocks. So that's potential. Occasionally, somebody will find something important and post it on there, and we'll try to get them to provide information to museums and stuff like the Cincinnati Museum Center.
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, if it's just a rock or something, then so be it. But yeah, it could be the missing bone that somebody's been looking for.
Well,
So yeah, get it
there was
checked
a
out.
case
You never know.
last year where a woman found a mastodon tooth in a creek way out in southwestern Kentucky, an area where you usually don't have mastodon or mammoth bones or anything. And it was a beautiful tooth, and we got her to donate it to the Cincinnati Museum Center. And the important thing, of course, is the locality, having the exact location it came from. So that really helped out knowledge of where this particular type of, where mammoths were found. So that was nice.
Yeah, don't just cast it aside or ignore it. Or well, yeah, somebody out there will want to check it out and find out what it is. So please, somebody find something, get a hold of somebody. You
Yeah, you
never
were asking
know.
earlier about how, basically I really didn't encounter much in the way of creationism as a kid, except I do remember finding one time the Jehovah's Witness little blue book they hand out to people
Mm-hmm.
on evolution. Um, they actually accepted the world was old, but they had all this horrible information. And I just was outraged by that book as a kid. I was maybe 12 or 13 when I found that. That was probably my first exposure to creationism. And then when I was in college, well, back up a little bit in high school, my high school biology teacher pretty much skipped stuff directly related to evolution at the end of the
Mm.
semester, claiming we were out of time and didn't have time to go into the book. I had fossils and stuff I wanted to bring in and show and tell.
So
And
they have to teach it, but unfortunately, he ran out of time.
I
Right?
ran out, dang it.
I was
I
gonna
guess I
teach
have
it. Yeah.
time to talk to
James
the track.
Apperson in the chat. Good to see you, James.
But yeah, so that was really another sort of introduction to. I really wasn't quite aware of why at the time, but I figured it out eventually. Oh, it's because of the evolution stuff that they weren't willing to bother. And then in
Yeah,
college,
again, you're leading right into my next question is what got you,
what made
so
me an activist?
you saw that pamphlet. What other
Well, I was
things
a freshman in
irritated you?
college, actually about to become a freshman in college, and our local school board suddenly had this really jiffy thing they were going to teach called scientific creationism.
Mm.
There was a big fight in the local newspapers and before the school board about that. And I took about as much, every time I read about it, I was always reading the newspaper back in those days when we actually had hard copy newspapers. This was 1981. And one day,
We're dating
yeah,
ourselves talking
yeah,
about newspapers.
well, one day they announced that Henry Morris from the Institute for Creation Research
Mm.
had given a lecture on dinosaurs at the local Ashland Avenue Baptist Church on how dinosaurs lived along early people and were fire breathing dragons and all this other bullshit. And that was just too much. And I finally found the name of the person that was the opposition to creation, the teaching creationism. Her name was Dr. Eugenie Scott. She was the physical anthropologist in the anthropology department at UK at the time. And I met up with her, and she encouraged me to show up at school board meetings and write letters to the editor and stuff like that. And that's what I did. And eventually we won on a very close decision in the local school board. And we didn't teach creationism in our schools here. Although, it was a 5 school board members, and it was divided 2 for, 2 against, and 1 undecided. The undecided finally decided not to teach. It would be inappropriate to teach creationism. So I got involved at that point, and things pretty much died down around here for a long time, but it would come up all the time, and I got in the habit of writing letters to the editor when it did come up. And also I helped found the local skeptics group. By then I was also interested in a lot of various weird paranormal stuff that was being promoted in the newspapers uncritically. And the 2 other people involved in the formation of our local Kentucky Skeptics Group, it's called CASES, Kentucky Association of Science Educators and Skeptics, were Dr. Robert Baker, the famous psychologist. He was the head of the psychology department. He would do ghost hunting, but he would do it from a skeptical point of view. And he was an expert on hypnosis, showing that most of what you know about hypnosis is pretty silly. But the other person was Joe Nickell, who was famous for showing that the Shroud of Turin was a medieval fake, and he predicted the radiocarbon date within 50 years before they finally carbon dated it. So I was active with those people. And then after I finally graduated, taking much too long with my degree because I was busy with all this other stuff that I should have been working on my master's thesis.
Yeah, when Dan's not doing all this other stuff, he's off saving Lois Lane somewhere. So,
well, I ended up getting a decent petroleum geology job and moving to Texas for a few years. And I joined up with the North Texas skeptics down there and went to Carl Baugh's Creation Evidences Museum and got to see the fake footprints.
Oh, and just real quickly, just back up a minute for folks that don't know who Henry Morris is. Henry Morris wrote the Flood book, and it's like the Bible for the modern creationism movement. He's one of the ones that really started it all.
Yeah, modern scientific creationism was basically copied from the stuff the Seventh-day Adventists had written back in the 1920s, but Henry Morris, of course, being a fundamentalist Protestant, he thought that Seventh-day Adventists were heretics. So he basically copied a lot of their fake flood geology and acted like it was his new invention or something. Whereas back in the 1920s, it was something done by a guy named George McCready Price. But he never mentions these earlier people except for just an occasional footnote. And Henry Morris ended up forming the Institute for Creation Research, who, in spite of the name, fails to do any real research. And they were the leading creationist organization throughout the 60s, all the way up till Answers in Genesis in the 1990s pretty much took over their spot.
So then you were mentioning Carl Baugh, and Carl Baugh has his own little museum of sorts down in Texas, right?
Yeah, at the time it was just an old trailer, like a trailer park trailer, with these supposed man tracks, supposedly human footprints found with dinosaurs. But they were all incredibly bad carvings. And the ones out in the field in the riverbeds are mostly misinterpreted dinosaur tracks, where the dinosaur is walking in soft mud, and they take one of the toes and, in some cases, had added one of the middle toes of the dinosaur and added human toes to the very tip of it to make it look like a human footprint. And sometimes they were just erosional marks. So this guy had a whole museum, and he's expanded it, and he's still in business. He must be 90 years old now, but he's still in business down in near the Paluxy River in Glen Rose, Texas was the name of the place he was at.
Well, he used to have John Pendleton on all the time. And John Pendleton passed away about a year or so ago, and it was a real shame because he was good entertainment. But yeah, he was a regular. He was a regular on Carl Baugh.
Yeah.
And hello, Pragmatic Crystal. Good to see you.
Carl Baugh is disliked even by Ken Ham because he'll say such outrageous, totally fanciful things that even Ken Ham won't go along with because they're so easy to debunk the things that Carl Baugh said.
And that's something a lot of people don't know is a lot of the creationists don't agree. Ken Ham and Hovind and Baugh and the different ones, they have their differences, and they are very I'm thinking of the word for it, but each one of them wants to be king of creationism. And it's, just the way they, spell it out. And they get very irritated when one of them disagrees with them.
Yeah. It's really amazing because Ken Ham came here from Australia back in the 1980s and worked for Institute for Creation Research. And he had so much success at his sort of a traveling roadshow of church appearances where he would give talks, that he finally figured out it would be better for him to stay here in the States where the money was good than to go back to Australia. And he sort of struck out from, Ken struck out from the Institute for Creation Research and came here to Kentucky and started Answers in Genesis in the early 1990s. about the same time I came back from working in Texas. So
Again, there's fate following you,
yeah,
isn't it?
it, it's
They
providence,
they want,
obviously.
yeah.
And anyway, Ken started Answers in Genesis and talked about the Creation Museum for more than a decade before it was actually built. Early attempts to buy land by him, he wanted to buy it adjacent to Big Bone Lick State Park, which is the birthplace of North American vertebrate paleontology. And there were big zoning battles, and we managed to have some help from the Tri-State Freethinkers and a few other organizations, and eventually defeat that. They ended up with a different piece of property, but it still took them at least 10 more years to build the Creation Museum, which opened in 2007. And in 2010, they announced, of course, the Ark Encounter, as usually we call it, the Ark Park. And they managed to fool state government into providing a total of $18 million in tax incentives to be built here in Kentucky. And that's in the form of a tax rebate. They get some of their sales tax that they earn every year back to the tune of almost $1.8 million. And this was challenged right away. The governor hadn't at the time hadn't vetted the project very well, and didn't realize this was a very conservative fundamentalist ministry that was going to build this giant Noah's Ark. The governor at the time thought it was going to be a big theme park, sort of like Disney World, that was sort of based on the Ark.
Well, that's how Ken sells it. It's going to
Yeah.
be bigger and better than Disney. And
Well,
so you hear the word. So yeah.
yeah. So anyway, when he would talk to his church audiences, it would always be, "This is going to be the greatest evangelical thing that we can bring in and convert people with." And when he would talk to other government officials, he'd say, "This is a business, and we're going to bring in all these jobs and stuff like that." And it was just basically a scam. And they originally agreed that they were not going to discriminate in hiring, and they would hire anybody regardless of their religious belief to work for the park. And that's what the original agreement with the state was, is that they would not have to have the potential employees wouldn't have to sign a statement of faith. Well, about the time they were about to approve the $18 million, I was going through the Answers in Genesis webpage and looked at their job offerings, and there was a job that was obviously at the Ark. They tried to deny it was for the Ark in some of their private correspondence later on, but it was definitely for a computer assisted design person to work for the Ark Park. And I pointed this out to state government and wrote an op-ed for the local newspaper. And for a few weeks I was ignored, and all at once Americans United for the Separation of Church and State got a hold of the story, and they got back and wrote a letter to state government, and state government said to Answers in Genesis that they basically would have to formally agree not to discriminate, and Answers in Genesis refused, and it put their tax incentive thing in jeopardy. Well, it ended up going to court, and eventually Answers in Genesis won the court case, which is documented in the documentary I was in a few years later called We Believe in Dinosaurs. It documents the whole history of the Ark Park project. It's available to watch via like Amazon Prime or something like that for just a few
Links
dollars.
are in the description.
Oh, good. Good.
Yep. It's I've got a couple of different links there, a couple of different ways to go see it. So go if you
But
haven't seen it, and every now and then it shows up on PBS or something. So
that's
yeah,
another story
watch
that
for it.
I'd like to tell a little bit. But the picture here with me with Ken Ham.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. You got to explain the picture. So
There was a particular show for potential donors for the Ark Park while they were trying to raise money. This is in, I think, 2014. And I went ahead and just got online and signed up as a potential investor. And I brought along with me Joe Sonka, who is now a reporter at the Louisville Courier Journal newspaper. At the time, he was working for a thing called Leo Weekly. It's one of these weekly magazines that they put outside of bars and things to tell you what's going on and stuff. And he wrote up a nice account of our visit to Ken Ham's fundraiser. I also wrote up an account for the Panda's Thumb. Panda's Thumb is my favorite blog. So anyway, we infiltrate this fundraiser, and I gave my real name and all, and went in there and listened to Ken Ham speak. And after his talk, trying to raise money for this, um, they had all these different documents for potential investors, and I managed to sweet talk a copy of this out of their hands, and got all sorts of information. You can see I'm holding there next, and then we ran into Ken Ham in the hallway, and I took Joe Sonka's picture with Ken Ham, and Joe Sonka took my picture with Ken Ham. You can tell from the looks on the faces here that one of these people is much happier than the other. And Ken doesn't know precisely who I am, but he's got a sudden feeling that I'm not the supporter that he had hoped I was.
The hairs were standing up on the back of his neck.
Yeah, and my skin on my hand was burning from touching him. So anyway, that's the story behind that picture. But anyway, eventually I got into the documentary We Believe in Dinosaurs. A lot of people in the scientific community here wouldn't talk to this documentary. Well, they would talk to the documentary filmmakers that were doing this thing on the Ark encounter. And they wouldn't say anything on camera against the Ark. These were people at local museums and regional museums. And they would all say, well, we can't talk about this. This guy's right in our backyard. We can't have the public controversy. But there's this guy down in Lexington named Dan Phelps that will talk your ear off about the Ark Park. So that's how I got in this particular documentary that didn't finally air on PBS until 2000. I guess it was right before COVID hit, right in January.
Yeah.
The documentary came out in mid 2019, but it aired on PBS's Independent Lens program in 2020, February of 2020, about 3 weeks before COVID hit, which sort of hurt the showing of it a lot of places. And then they reran it last December of 2022 in 46 states here in the U.S., some American Samoa, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, Guam, and a bunch of other places. But guess what place they didn't rerun it? Any guesses?
Kentucky.
Kentucky Educational TV. Gosh darn, they had something else they had to show that night.
They were gonna run it, but they ran out of time, right?
Yeah, it's almost on that level. And I was very tempted to do a Freedom of Information thing, but everybody says, Dan, you don't want to be a jerk with Kentucky Educational TV. But there was obviously somebody there for political reasons didn't want this to re-air on KET again. And what can you do? Yeah. But anyway, a lot of people know about it now, so at least I encourage people to watch the show and promote it as much as you can.
I've seen it, and if you haven't seen it, go see it. Like I say, there's link. I tried to put all the links in the description, so hopefully everything we're talking about you can find a link for in the description. So, and about halfway here, I wanted to make sure I said hi to everybody. And Mr. Scott Duke says, does Dan have any information about the working environment at AIG and or the Creation Museum? Is it like a cult?
Well, it's hard to define cult, but yeah, they are extremely picky about who they hire. If you look at their statement of faith, everybody has to hire as the sign before they're hired. I mean, it goes in all the exact 6,000-year-old Earth, 24/7 creation, Noah's flood, the Tower of Babel, all these different things you're required to believe in, but also requires that you not only can't have sex outside of marriage, but you can't masturbate, anything sexually different, whether you're homosexual or anything else. That's obviously out. You have to belong to a local Bible-believing church, and of course the choices in that area are pretty limited. Even as a conservative place as Williamstown, where the Ark is, um, even the majority of people there can't really sign all this stuff, and they'd have to lie if they do. And we suspect a lot of people work there just go ahead and lie to get the job and the paycheck. But I know one of your previous guests on this show, Seth, he used to work there in the IT department, and he has different stories. And he knew until recently he still knew people that worked there. The pay is so bad that I understand there's a big turnover in employees. They have anywhere from, the ARC has about 800 employees plus about 120 volunteers. Um, the Creation Museum has a similar number of both employees and volunteers.
I love when my guests follow right along with my notes, because I was going to ask you, is Ken Ham cheap?
Oh yeah, apparently most of these people don't make the high salaries like Ken Ham. Ken Ham, of course, Ken Ham does a lot of work, so I can't really grudge him the fact that he makes 230,000 a year. At least the most recent IRS report I've been reviewing, he makes $230,000 a year plus about 20,000 or 30,000 more in various amenities that he apparently gets. It wasn't really individually itemized. He also has about 10 other people that make more than 100,000 a year. He has his son-in-law Bodie Hodge on the payroll. Another son-in-law, I can't remember his name off the top of my head at the moment. He has two daughter-in-laws and a son. He has at least 5 employees presently on the payroll, at least as the end of 2021. As far as it being cult-like, well, I guess you can define your own version of cult. I know they've had things that could be interpreted as exorcisms at the Creation Museum, where they go around and pray on everything, because I think it might have been due to the Bill Nye debate that there were so many unbelievers there or something. So they have things like that that are really weird. But I'm always hesitant to call something a cult. I guess it's the way they treat former members would be the best definition of whether or not something is a cult. And I don't know that anybody's been shunned, but they are treated shabbily, I think, if they defect from the organization.
Mm.
Somebody here's a fossil collector. I like to see that.
Yeah, say James said, when I was 7 in the late 70s, I went looking for fossils often in Cincinnati. We found some great ones.
Yeah, Cincinnati is one of the world's best places to find Ordovician age marine invertebrates. Ordovician is a time period that ended about 440 million years ago. And we've in fact named the very last part of the Ordovician period the Cincinnatian. Geologists refer to this worldwide as the Cincinnatian stage of the Ordovician. And there's so many paleontologists have grown up in the Cincinnati, northern Kentucky, Cincinnati, Ohio area. There's an organization in Cincinnati that's a lot like the Kentucky Paleontological Society called the Dry Dredgers. And if you live in Cincinnati, I really recommend going to the Dry Dredger meetings. They usually meet the same night we do, but they also have excellent field trips. About once a year, we'll have a joint picnic with them. So they know a lot of places to collect in the immediate Cincinnati area. Of course, I'm 80 miles south of there, and we go over all over different parts of Kentucky.
Yeah, Scott Duke said too, my love for dinosaurs and paleontology kept me out of Christianity for quite a while as a kid, until I fell for a girl. And somehow I became a Christian.
You can do both. I've had some.
Just stuck with the rocks.
Yeah, I mean, one of my.
I understand, Scott.
My master's thesis was Stephen Mosier, Dr. Stephen Mosier. He teaches up at Wheaton College now. And he is a very strong critic of creationism, but he's still an evangelical Christian. I mean, you can be both, and it's no big deal. People only judge you on what you actually publish in the scientific literature, not what you personally believe and stuff that's irrelevant to paleontology.
Well, we were talking a little earlier about Dr. Joel Duff, and
yeah,
he's a believer, but he goes with the science too.
Yeah.
So,
And like I said earlier too, I try not to say things that would insult people like that. I mean, my own disbelief in religion doesn't mean that I'm going to attack religion. I like to stick to the bad and misrepresentations of science by the creationists. And I always hate calling creationists pseudoscientists because they don't even rise to that. It's sort of a rejection of science in a way. It's
mm,
if you read some of the papers they put out in their supposedly technical journals, I even refer to it in the film as a parody of science. They recently had one on, well, they believe that most of Earth's geology happened during the 1 year of Noah's flood, and that means all of plate tectonics and all the heavy rainfall and all of the volcanic eruptions and meteorite impacts and stuff like that. If that all happened in 1 year, the amount of heat given off by the processes involving friction or the thermal heat from igneous intrusions would basically boil the oceans. I mean, the math on it isn't all that difficult to figure out. So the creationists actually realized that's a problem, and they recently published a thing in their thing called the Answers Research Journal. It's a thing that Ken Ham's group puts out that is basically a parody of a scientific journal. And to make a submission, you have to agree to all of the Noah's flood and the young Earth and all these different things. And the paper they put together has all these appendices of mathematical calculations of the Earth's heat budget and how much frictional heat would be created by plate tectonics and all these different things. But when you actually read the paper, you get down to the last paragraph and they say, well, basically, we can't explain it, therefore a miracle occurred. The heat was supernaturally dissipated. And by any modern definition of science, anything since the Renaissance, that's just not how science works. You don't say that then a miracle occurred, like the famous Sidney Harris cartoon that has the
yeah, I was
signs
thinking the
on the
same. Yeah,
blackboard, and one of them says, "Then a miracle occurred." That's not
right.
the way it works. I mean,
That's
I
a
think
classic.
Charles could
Yeah.
figure that out. So anyway, I wrote up a nice. Well, I don't know if it's nice. It's other people's opinion. I wrote up a short description of the paper and why I thought it was bullshit, and put it on the blog called the Panda's Thumb. And the Panda's Thumb is one of my favorite places to put stuff. It it is a blog that mainly concentrates on intelligent design creationism, but they're very nice about letting me publish stuff on my opposition to the Art Park and Creation Museum and Ken Ham. Another blog I'd really recommend that other the people interested in this are put out by William and Susan Trollinger. They're professors at the University of Ohio Dayton, and they are Catholics, and I think they're working at some religious school, but I think it's a Protestant school, but that doesn't really matter. They put out this blog called Writing America, and a lot of the posts on there have to do with the Creation Museum. And they've even written a book called Writing America, RIGHT, Writing, not write, but Writing America at the Creation Museum. And it's basically just showing all the not only the bad science, but the non-science and fake Bible quotes and stuff they have on display at like the Creation Museum. Many of the things they put forward as supporting some position they have has no relevance whatsoever to what they're trying to claim it says. I mean, I really don't care because I'm not into the religious aspect that much, but at the same time, it just shows some problems with honesty with the creationist.
Well, I know you shared your position with me about debates, but as far as the so-called Ken Ham Bill Nye debate, what were your thoughts on that, and his follow-up tour of the Ark?
I don't think he should have done, especially the first one. Um, to this day, what was that? It was February of 2014, and to this day, when Ken Ham starts some of his blog posts, he says, "Yeah, when I was debating Bill Nye back in 2014, blah 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 blah." They're still beating it like a dead horse. They sell videos of it. They sell videos dissecting every word that Bill Nye said. They have like this enormous book where they go through every sentence that Bill Nye said. they put all this bullshit together, and it's just incredible the amount of money and publicity they got out of the debate. Whereas Bill Nye got a bunch of money, and I think Bill Nye just stomped the holy hell out of Ken Ham, but it didn't matter. Just the fact that he was on the stage with them meant that Ken Ham and his organization got a bunch of money and are still milking this for everything they can. 9 years later, or 9 years later, and he just shouldn't have done it. But on the other hand, Bill Nye is a great guy. He, like I said, he did a great job against Ken Ham. If you look at,
I love Bill Nye.
yeah,
Grew up with the show. Bill.
well, he was a little bit after my time as a kid. I'm 60 now, and but he's a good guy. He was well prepared, but it didn't matter. Just the fact that he was on stage and gave Ken Ham a platform that he's still using is a problem. Now, this thing where he went around the ark with Ham, like on opening day or the day after, um, eh, he probably shouldn't have agreed to let them sell the video and stuff. But he didn't say anything bad. It was just, you know,
And if you
got
pay
himself
close
in.
attention, tagging along at the Ark tour is Aaron Ra.
Yeah.
You catch glimpses of him. He was right
Yeah.
there
Well,
following
I think I was
him
there the
around.
day before because when the film crew that followed me around for We Believe in Dinosaurs, their camera battery died, and they had to bum batteries off of Bill Nye's people.
Well,
So,
that's segue right into it then. So what was it like making the documentary and working with everybody? And
oh, they were
did you get a hard time from Ham doing filming there and
oh,
everything? Or
well, nobody really approached us while we were there. But the funny thing, I got the feel about the filmmakers like they were family, even though they were neutral. They had to be fair in everything they did. But they came to my house so many times. I took them out in the field to collect fossils. We met with the other guy in the documentary, um, David Sterling McMillan. He's in there. We met with him in the field. They did enough film of myself and my house, even my dog, who only appears in the documentary for 2 seconds.
you
So,
can't forget the dog. You just can't.
well,
Did you hear that, Trees? Are you still listening out there, brother? Can't forget the dog, right, brother?
yeah.
Oh,
Unfortunately, I
and
live
Randy,
upstairs now.
good to see you too, Randy, in the chat. I appreciate you, man.
But anyway, they had enough to made a 20-part miniseries on the scale of Ken Burns' Civil War show on it. And it's amazing how little, after all that filming, actually got into the documentary.
Hmm.
Later on, when it aired on PBS in early 2020, local editorial is at the Herald Leader. Her name is Linda Blackford. She's been a long-term, one of the few reporters I can rely on to present stuff on the Ark in the Herald Leader. She did an op-ed about what she saw. She got a preview of the documentary, and it made Ken Ham mad as hell. Some of the things she said, and Ken Ham wrote in and said, "Well, it wasn't his fault that the little town that is across the interstate from the Ark Park didn't financially benefit." But he keeps referring to this as a little town across the interstate. But this is the town that gave him 100 acres of land for $2, $200,000 cash, um, several numerous acres of land, gigantic tax breaks, and they sponsored the $62 million junk bond thing that eventually resulted in the Ark being built. So that made me so mad that I wrote an op-ed for the Herald Leader answering Ken Ham on that, and I pointed out that the city bent over forward and backwards to them.
And he did promise a boom
Yeah,
to the
and the little town,
locals. He did, yeah.
everybody there, just all the businesses can't make a go of it. And in fact, since more recently, Ken Ham is at least somebody at Answers in Genesis is at least partial owner of a brand new hotel adjacent to the Ark. The Ark sold a couple of acres of land, and there's a new hotel there. But I was able to figure out because of the sale of the land and who was involved in the company that owns this hotel, that it's the same chief financial officer that works for the Ark Encounter. So the Ark Encounter at least owns part of this hotel, and they had originally promised the locals that private hotels and private restaurants would come in. But once you get to the Ark, there's no reason to leave, and they do everything they can to vacuum every shekel they can out of people's pockets there.
Yeah,
So
because he
there's
put
no
in his
encourage.
own restaurant. He's got his own munchie stands.
Yeah,
And
he had to
now
carry
he's got
that.
his own hotel. All he needs is his own gas station out front, and he's got everything covered, doesn't he?
Yeah, yeah. At one point, they had bought a gas station, but they had the underground storage tanks removed, and that they spent an enormous amount of money on this little postage stamp of a piece of property. I've never been able to figure out why they did that, but they basically own all of the frontage along there. It'd be interesting to see who owns the gas station that's just almost across the street from them, approximately across the street, not quite. But
Wouldn't be surprised.
yeah, I'm just getting an idea of something else to look up.
Yeah, all the locals, it's all going right back into Ken Ham's pocket.
But anyway, once you're at the Ark, spend the day there. If you do go to the town, there's nothing there. It's a nice little. It's almost like a movie set of a rural town, almost Mayberry RFD. But you look at all the stores; they're out of business. They're empty. There's vacant furniture stores. The bank has moved to a new location. There's a town up the road about 7 or 8 miles called Drawbridge that does have a number of new hotels, but people staying there are just as likely to be going to Cincinnati for stuff as they are down to Williamstown for the Ark. And Ken takes credit for that, but it's not any evidence of the local economy being helped to the extent that they say it is. And in fact, I'd say it has hurt them in some ways. The Northern Kentucky Tourism Bureau has this web page, and it promotes the Ark. And apparently, Northern Kentucky Tourism received about $130,000 to do this thing called the Kentucky Faith Trail. And I've yet to be able to track down information on what precisely this is and who the money is going to on it. That's one of my other projects here, I guess. But it's just amazing all the little umbrella companies and different things that Answers in Genesis is doing now. They recently.
When I was asking you, Ken Ham is always complaining about flying third, fourth class. I guess they throw him in the baggage area when he flies or something. And what else did we find out when you were looking around there about airplanes? There was something else interesting, wasn't there?
Apparently, they've got some deep money come to them recently. It's really, really interesting. I'll talk about the airplane first. Yeah. I found out that they are part owners of this thing called Answers Collective. And Answers Collective is one of these shell companies that's owned by Answers in Genesis. See, Answers in Genesis is nonprofit, but Answers Collective is for profit. There's also a Crosswater Canyon that is nonprofit. Then there's Ark Encounter that is for profit, and they're the ones that get the tax incentive from state tourism. But anyway, Answers Collective is this small business they run, and they had purchased at least 1/4 interest in this Cessna. I forgot the model number, but it's a Cessna jet. And you can actually look up, there's a website, because I have the tail number, the N690 or whatever the name of the airplane is. You can actually look up where that airplane is flown and keep a track on it. But the thing is, it's owned by 3 other organizations besides Answers in Genesis. So it's hard to tell. They make flights to the Cayman Islands and stuff like that. I don't know who's on the plane then. So it might be one of these other companies. But Cayman Islands is famous for different banking things. But I have no
with a lot of those metal looking suitcases getting on board.
You can imagine this. This might be a good TV show maybe. But it also takes you see where Ken Ham spoke in Arkansas or something. You can see where it flew to the airport in Arkansas. So that's obviously Answers in Genesis had it that day. But these other flights, I have no idea who it was for. So I can't really say with any certainty who was going where. But it's really, as much as I criticize their science or their attempts at science, their impotent attempts at science or their science parodies, they are brilliant when it comes to money running stuff. Answers Collective, according to this IRS 990 form I'm looking at last day or two, they actually started out as a company that gets all the money for the parking lot at the Ark. When you park at the Ark, it costs $10 to park there. And apparently the money goes into this organization, this business owned by Answers in Genesis, but it's a for-profit business that's taxable called Answers Collective. And it's the exact name is like the Parking Lot Collective or something like that. I forgot the exact wording of it.
Praise
It's brilliant.
Jesus.
It is
Praise
brilliant.
Jesus.
I mean, why are these people so bad at science when they're so good at shit like this? And they must have some big donors because, I've already mentioned the hotel that had to cost millions of dollars to build. They've added like a 3D virtual reality theater at the Ark. They have a carousel that was hand carved in Italy that was shipped to the Ark and reconstructed there, where you can ride on dinosaurs and extinct mammals and pterosaurs on a carousel. But the films I've seen, they all are running it so slow that's the dullest, boringest looking carousel. And some poor kid that's been to a real carousel
And
at
you
a
can
state
zip
fair.
line. Don't forget the zip lines.
Oh yeah, they have
That's his
that's
big
another
attraction
company.
is the zip lines.
Yeah, both the Creation Museum and the Ark Park have zip lines, but it's owned by a different company that shares the money somehow. I'm not sure
Hmm.
what's going on there. And now they must have some really deep pockets because they bought the Toyota USA's North American headquarters building for $31 million recently. And when you look at their old 990 forums, there's not enough money coming in. In fact, they claim to be losing money, at least the, I don't want to get it backwards, the for-profit Ark Encounter is apparently losing money on the Ark, but some of the money it's so confusing. I really wish I had a CPA would help me out because I don't want to say the wrong thing and get sued or anything. But I really wish somebody would help me out with going through some of these tax forms and stuff. One thing I discovered was a few months back. Remember
We're
the
looking for a
videos?
CPA out there. Anybody
Yeah,
that's got a little free time, you get a hold of Dan. Could be very interesting.
yeah. There was this group that was funding the "He Gets Us" ads on TV. You know, the ads that made Jesus look like a real liberal, nice guy that you'd like to know and be pals with and have fighting on your side. Well, it turned out that this organization is funded by something called the Servant Group, and the Servant Group not only funds the "He Gets Us" ads for Jesus, they also give to a lot of other companies, and it's one of these donor. I forgot the exact term. I kicked myself here, but it's a donor assigned fund charity. So you can donate a bunch of money to this servant foundation, and they will in turn donate it to the charity of your choice. And somebody with deep pockets has donated millions of dollars to Answers in Genesis through this. And they're probably getting money from other sources as well. But they also fund other organizations like the Discovery Institute, um, Institute for Creation Research got a little bit of money, and then there were several right-wing global warming deniers out there that got money from this group. But this is like a donor advised fund, I think might be the term I'm looking for, and they end up accepting the money from who knows who, and then giving it to the charity that's been designated. So
And
we
then
have no
why?
idea who the billionaire out here somewhere that's
Well,
giving
the
these.
the billionaire then is writing it off somehow, right?
Yeah, and it might have to do with the people that own Hobby Lobby, the Green family. family. It also has the Museum of the Bible, which has an exhibit on the third
Ken
floor,
Ham promoted that place.
and they gave
He
them a
he went
tour.
he went he went there and made a video on it and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, so it could be the Greens, but still, they have their limits of how much they can give. So somehow he's getting a lot of money from these other organizations, and who knows?
And
I mean,
it seems endless. Like you went down the list, but then he just built the first century model of
yeah, they're
Israel
raising
or
money for that, but
Judea or whatever.
yeah, but they had
And
no
then
money.
he says, "Oh, and now I need a building to put it in." And then another fundraiser starts.
Yeah,
It's
and they
just
got
like
the
an
money.
endless cycle.
You know, they can put up a fundraiser and have $20 million in a few days, and that's one of my bugaboos. Is we've always wanted to have a Kentucky Museum of Natural History, and we've had scientists at the Kentucky Academy of Sciences. We will have meetings, and everybody will say, "Oh, we can have this in the museum and that in the museum," but we have yet to raise the first dollar on it. You know, and this has been going on since the 1980s, talking about Kentucky Museum of Natural History, and we've never gotten the money together. And Ken Ham has come in. To his credit, I mean, it's embarrassing to the scientific community here in Kentucky that this wackaloon has come into Kentucky and has two museums. They're both fake museums. They're not really what we would call an actual science museum. They're
Yeah, he wasn't happy that he isn't listed with the legitimate museums in the whatever agency does that. They
yeah,
didn't count him as a real museum.
but he has two of them, and we have zero. The scientific,
Yeah,
we have all these neat collections on University of Kentucky campus that could potentially be donated and make a real museum, but they're all in these little storerooms and these side buildings that are poorly maintained. I know the
and I have
paleontology.
nothing against you billionaires donating money so they can have a museum and putting your name on it. Knock yourself out, but come on, yeah.
Well, maybe not
This is
Elon
something to
Musk.
put your well, yeah. We'll spell it backwards. But yeah, like I said, I wouldn't. If I was driving across Elon Bridge every day, maybe I'd give him a little slack. If I was driving down the Bezos Highway, but they're you can't get them on the taxes, and they don't do it just by themselves, out of
Yeah,
their own good heart or anything. So
but
yeah,
back in the day,
that's the only conflict I have.
Yeah, Andrew Carnegie gave all these money for museums and libraries all over the states. Um, but
And that's great. It's something back, and it's something that you want your name on something. Hey, there you go. You got your name on something for all of time. So it's getting a little bit after 8 here, and I want to start winding things up. I wanted to ask you before we go about the new employee that Ken has brought in,
oh,
and is Bodie not going to inherit the presidency of AIG? Is he not
yeah.
being handed the reins? What do you think?
Well, a lot of us have speculated over the last few years with Ken Ham getting up in years. He's in his mid 70s now, and he's always looked frail. But again, he seems like he's improved from how he looked years back. A lot of people thought his son-in-law Bodie Hodge was going to be his successor, and I haven't seen much of Bodie Hodge on anything Answers in Genesis has done lately. In fact, a lot of the usual crew on Answers in Genesis weekly newscast and stuff is no longer haven't been on there for a long time. I suspect that, well, it's factual that they only have their second string people that you rarely, they're low down on the totem pole of Answers in Genesis. Um, so I'm not sure what's going on. They're either organizing something for this new Toyota building that they're building and are reconstructing to put their offices, and a private Christian academy they're going to start running out of there called Answers Academy. That might have something to do with it, but it seems like some of these major people have disappeared. And recently, he hired an Australian named Martin Isles, and it's spelled Martyn Isles, Iles. And previously, Martin Isles was head of the Australian Christian Lobby. It was a right wing group in Australia that um, was very ultra conservative. They were always trying to fight the gay people having the right to marry, all these different things against transsexuals, all this stuff called anti wokeism, which they can't even define what woke is. So I'm not sure how they know.
Of course they can't.
But anyway, this guy was big in that, and somehow they decided that they needed a different leader besides him. Well, Ken Ham had him before to a preacher conference at the Ark. They have about every year. They have several right-wing hate preachers at these things called Answers for Pastors and stuff like that. They bring in several extreme right, ultra-conservative, what I refer to as hate preachers, because they're say hateful things about the gay people and the transsexuals, and anything they don't like is just mean. I mean, it's not even beyond just talking against them, it's mean-spirited stuff. But Martin Isles is his new employee, and he's like chief ministry officer now. And the way he was talking him up the other day, it sounds almost as if he might be a successor to Ken Ham. This guy is a lot younger than Ham. He's in his late 30s. He has a law degree and had previously done IT work. And he's a very good public speaker. You know, as much as I don't care for Ken Ham, he's also a very good public speaker. A lot of these guys, they're used to speaking in churches every Sunday, and they end up being just fantastic public speakers. Run rings around a lot of people on our side. And the content of what they say is total horseshit, but no, that would be an insult to good Kentucky thoroughbred horseshit.
Well, and it's like, to his credit, Ken Ham can raise money.
Yeah.
And if he would just raise it for something else, we would be praising his name. You know,
Yeah.
What a great guy. He's Christian, but look at this. He built a museum, he built a bridge, No, he builds his for-profit things, So and then he wonders why we criticize. It's like, what? How many poor people is that Ark Park helping?
Somebody did the calculation that you could buy like a small house for every poor person in eastern Kentucky that's on food stamps with the money spent on the Ark. But anyway, this new guy, he is a firebrand, and he is going to probably be a big problem with Kentucky education, anything to do with Kentucky politics. Earlier this year, Answers in Genesis actually had an announcement type meeting where they were actually promoting legislation for the legislature for an anti-abortion bill, which is something a nonprofit is not supposed to be promoting. They can say they're against abortion all they want. In fact, they have displays on it. That's okay. That's their right to do that. But there's this one politician out in Arizona put together legislation saying that a fertilized cell from the moment of conception is considered a human being instead of like a fetus at 8 weeks. And this would mean that the various people could be charged with murder, including the doctor, if any sort of abortion occurred. And fortunately, the legislation didn't go anywhere in the state legislature. And if they wanted to say they were against abortion, that's fine. But they went ahead and actually promoted the specific bill at this rally at the Creation Museum. And I can see Martin Isles being keen on doing stuff like that. He might show up at future textbook things going on. There's a really horrible thing going on in Kentucky right now. We have a governor's race. And we have a fairly reasonable governor right now, Andy Beshear. And he's running against the Attorney General, Daniel Cameron. And Daniel Cameron is this right-wing conservative that has clerked for Judge Tattenhove, the guy that ruled in favor of the Ark over the tax incentives. He also got a personal tour of the Ark Park by Ken Ham back in 2021. And I actually have pictures of him learning that baby dinosaurs were taken on the Ark to save space, and that climate change isn't real. And anyway,
Oh
he
no,
couldn't.
it's climate change is real. It happens 4 times a year.
Well, but he believes that it's not, humans don't have anything to do with it. But
Right.
anyway, um, this was promoted on social media by the attorney general, and I did a freedom of information request and got these pictures. And I went through all these different things. I was on the verge of having to sue the attorney general because they refused to give me any information about what they talked about at the meeting, um, what the gas mileage was for all the people that drove to the Ark, and they were there for almost half a day. And if you look at the Panda's Thumb post I did on this, it shows that there was considerable time they could have talked about potential legislation. Um, we really don't know what they talked about. Anyway, I ended up asked for all these different pieces of information, was refused, and my open records request. When somebody refuses an open records request in Kentucky, uh, it is appealed to the Attorney General's office. Well, this was an open records request to the Attorney General's office, so it was the very agency that was protecting itself that refused my open records request, and they refused my appeal. And if they had denied my request and it had been um, um, refused by a merit system employee, that would have been fine. But it was a political appointee that reviewed my appeal. And my final option was to go to court myself, spend several $1,000s, either get an attorney or represent myself in court for 3 pages of emails. And I gave up. But I did put together the post for the Panda's Thumb. And I try to post it every place I can anytime the potential future governor's name shows up. Because if he's elected governor in the fall, we might lose the next generation science standards. There might be changes in textbooks. They might do a lot of stuff similar to what's going on in Florida right now with book banning. There's no end to it. And when the governor's race is held in November, the next governor takes office not in the next year, but in December. So we have an
And
interesting
that's the issue that a lot of us, get heat for. It's like, look, once again, you're getting flack for your religious beliefs because you're trying to stick your nose into everything else and everybody else's business and making everybody else follow the rules you chose to follow in your religion. The rest of us didn't. And then, well, what are you giving us flack for? And it's like, I wouldn't be giving you any flack again if Ken Ham was raising money and building museums and bridges. They
or a
don't see that,
hospital,
or a hospital. Yeah.
the Ken Ham
Go,
Memorial
please,
Hospital.
please
Man,
do that.
I would
Yeah,
salute the guy if he did
sure.
that.
Right, right. No, he builds this monument to making money. Well, not even making money, apparently.
Well,
Just a way
the money
for his
is
rich
shuffled around.
friends to run money around all over the
Yeah.
place.
Somebody's making money, but who knows?
And what would Jesus do? Jesus wept.
He tossed the money changers tables around too.
Yeah, you're right. They always kind of
Big
forget
ass
those parts,
Jesus.
don't they?
Yeehaw. Yeehaw.
Well, I wanted to thank everybody for joining in the chat. Like I say again, Trees and Randy and Scott and Pragmatic and Bree and James. Appreciate everybody stopping by. I appreciate the discussion. And before we end things, Dan, when your foot gets better, what's on the horizon for you?
Well, I hope to be able to go out to California. I was invited to give a talk on the Ark Park by Center for Inquiry West in Los Angeles, and I had to cancel it. It was scheduled for late June, which is only, gosh, that's only would have been 3 weeks ahead from now. But when my foot's better, hopefully in the fall I'll be able to do that then, or maybe early in next year. I just want to get back and go fossil collecting and shit like that again. I'm so sick of sitting here on the internet and watching TV all day. At least my concentration is back. I'm getting so I can read again. For a while there, because all the antibiotics and stuff I was on, I had a hard time even reading a book, and I'm usually a person that reads 2 or 3 books a week, and not even being able to read a magazine article was a little bit tough on me.
It's
But
frustrating.
yeah,
Yeah,
I'm much better now. So hopefully
that's
everything
great.
will be all right.
That's great. And I
But
and I
I have a
I
good friend,
wish
and
I,
my house. I have a 2 floor house, and it's dirty and lots of dog hair and stuff. And my friend let me stay at her place while I'm recovering here. But I'm probably going to move home here in another couple of days.
good to hear. Good to hear. And yeah, we wish you a speedy recovery and you're back out doing what you love very soon. And it was great talking with you.
All right.
And for
All
anybody that
hail
wants to keep
Bigfoot.
all
All hail
hail
Bigfoot.
Bigfoot, and for anybody that wants to let me know, Dan has email he puts out with all the information, the latest with Ken Ham and what's going on and everything. And if you want to know, uh, drop a comment below or send me the info. I'll hook you up with Dan. Dan be happy to send you his email. You get all the current info, and it's yeah, he's on them. If you want the latest information, it's in your email from Dan. So I appreciate it. I pop on, and like I said, there's the new preacher and everything, and Dan's already on it. I appreciate all the work you do and continue to do. And yeah, please stay on them. Yeah, it bothers a lot of us that they're trying to put this stuff in schools, that they're trying to pass laws against our brothers and sisters out there, and it's just it's too much overreach by people who always trying to say just leave us alone to go to church, and we'd be happy to if you just come on, let's not do this to people. It's just not right. It's not what Jesus would want if you're a believer. Seriously, ask yourself. Okay, let's all try to be groovy to each other. All hail Bigfoot. If you want to believe in something, believe in Bigfoot. Okay, Bigfoot's not bothering anybody. He's not passing any legislation against
I don't
anybody.
know. I don't know. I saw an article I posted to my Facebook page. There was a woman out in Paducah that was in her 20s, and she was explaining how she got pregnant to her sterile 50 some odd year old husband. That she was camping, and Bigfoot got in the tent with her. And oh well, that
Well,
Bigfoot, he gets around.
stay tuned. We have a idea in the works for an upcoming show that just may cover some of these topics. So no spoiler here, but just a tease. There may be something in the works behind the scenes. So and I appreciate Dan's time, and again, we hope that you have a speedy recovery. And thank you for being here and sharing your info with us. Thanks for everybody in the chat that's joining, and everybody. I hope you all have a great weekend. And if you like videos like these, if you like discussions like these, if you want to hear more of them, please hit the like and the subscribe with a bell. Leave a comment, and I hope to see you then. Good night, everybody.